All right, everybody. I'm really excited to introduce you, Derek Dickens. Those of you who don't know, we have people already logging in. So welcome to the
Mhm,
LinkedIn Live.
mhm.
Derek Dickens is a L&D leader. You've been a VP at numerous organizations with
Mhm.
organizational development, leadership development, and yeah, you have a very extensive background and leading
Mhm.
organizations, a lot of financial services, and a lot of credit unions, as well as
Yeah.
other. And yeah, I know that your latest LinkedIn article was about everyday heroes. So I'm excited to introduce the world, a lot of folks in my community who don't know who you are, and it seems like a lot of other L&D leaders will get a lot of value from this live stream as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's a great to be here. It is a passion of mine. I love everyday leaders, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation and maybe helping us to think a little bit differently about leadership and development training, because I think sometimes we're trying to do things, but maybe there's other things that need to happen. And I think everyday leaders is probably a concept that, at least how I've developed it, is a little bit different than you may have heard of in the
Hmm.
past.
Yeah, yeah. Just let's give the listeners or viewers
Yeah.
a sneak peek on what they're gonna get from attending this live stream. So it
Yeah.
sounds like you'll be discussing. So we'll go a little bit deep into your background, right? Just to
Mm.
see why you decided to speak on this topic, and then you're gonna
Yeah.
talk about the influence versus historical leaders,
Yeah.
and why this topic of everyday leaders is important to you, right? So we'll dig
Yeah.
into folks like, oh, let me get
Yeah, go
this.
ahead. Yeah.
Uh,
Anyway, I will. So background for me is, I've been tremendously influenced by a great leader. His name's my dad. And what I learned about my dad is that, first of all, he was a good entrepreneur. He was a small business, successful in small business, did a very good job with that. But he was also successful in the corporate world. But what I really have learned about him, and what I kind of started seeing when I was doing leadership development classes, I used to ask people, who are the most influential people in your lives? And I started seeing there's some people
hmm,
saying, they would point to people like Martin Luther King Jr. I love Martin Luther King Jr. I
hmm,
love I Have a Dream speech. I listen to it every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
hmm,
It's been tremendously influential on me.
hmm,
But I also heard, and I've heard from really high level leaders about people who are nobodies in our
hmm,
minds. No one's ever writing a book about them. And that, my dad's that case
hmm,
as well. And no one's writing a book about them. And I give
hmm,
one example is Michael Jordan. When you ask him who is his rock in life,
hmm,
he talks about his dad.
hmm,
And here's the greatest, disputably, the greatest basketball player ever to live. His
hmm,
dad didn't teach him to be the greatest basketball player, but I'm gonna posit that without his
hmm,
dad, Michael Jordan wouldn't have been the greatest basketball player ever to live.
hmm.
And Michael Jordan says that, not me. Not I don't say that. And what did he learn about basketball from him? Not a little bit, but probably not as much as he learned about from some of his coaches and from
Hmm.
some of his teammates. And so I started dividing these lines and seeing that people are actually more influenced by everyday leaders
Hmm.
who we know nothing about. And my fear is that we're losing that. And my
Mm,
fear is we're losing, and COVID uh, has made this even a greater and bigger problem. But
mm,
we are not surrounding ourselves with great leaders today, and especially as we look at the loneliness statistics that we have. 60 something percent of people say they don't have really anybody that they call close friends.
mm,
That's and the younger generations. We're
mm,
losing that interaction. But when I saw this from leaders and the great leaders that I saw, I was like, wow, they make great leaders in an organization. I'm finding out that they had people who were influencing them that
mm,
had never went to that level that they went to,
mm.
but influenced them every single day.
Yeah, that's pretty profound, right? What you're
Mhm,
saying reminds me of my wife, who I
mhm,
always ask. I remember we did this bonding exercise, and
mhm,
one of the prompts is like, "Hey, like, who are your heroes? Like, who are your heroes?" Of
mhm,
course, I'd said Tony Robbins,
mhm,
like Tim Ferriss, Lewis Howes, like a lot of these famous podcasters and people
yeah,
that. And then I asked my wife, and she said her mom her sister, and her dad. And
Mhm.
I was like, heroes? Like you would consider them heroes?
Yeah,
She's like, yeah, they're my heroes. And it blew my mind because I just assumed everyone else would say, like you said, folks like Michael Jordan or these prominent figures. But that was the first time, and it was my wife, you know, it's my wife. So I was just like,
yeah.
wow, like we're so different.
Yeah, and we do have a tendency to make we live like the celebrity culture in our organ, and there's nothing wrong with like saying Mahatma Gandhi is a phenomenal person, and I want to
Mm,
learn lessons of leadership from him. There's nothing
yeah,
wrong with doing that, but where it
yeah,
becomes is that Mahatma Gandhi is not living near me. Mahatma Gandhi
right.
is not keeping me accountable every single day. He's not teaching me
Mm,
how to communicate in culture. He's not teaching me just the little things that my dad does teaches me
mm,
an amazing thing. I'm here with my dad now. He lives in another state than I do, and he's literally 2 doors down from me right now. And I was
mm.
talking. I always bring in dirty clothes to work clothes to come here because he's always put me to work, and we're always working side by side. And it's something that I do all the time. And in fact, my uncle's here as well. And my uncle kind of got on me because I didn't do a good job painting, and he got on me about that. But it keeps accountable. I mean, that's leadership. They're looking
Mm,
at everyday leadership strategies, and he's saying,
mm,
hey, Derek, you know, you did this right, but what did you want? What about right here? And he pointed it out to me, and that's leadership right there.
mm,
When we look at corporate leadership, we often look at there's a concept of 70-20-10. A lot of people probably on this call know this if you're in the OD
mm,
space or leadership development space, where it's 10% of what we learn is in training classes.
mm,
20% of what we do in leadership is in mentoring, and
mm,
70% is real life action, where that
mm,
occurs every single day with people around you. There's an influencer on my LinkedIn. I actually had a conference. He was my keynote speaker that I got a few years ago. And every week he meets with a whole bunch of guys, and all they do is talk, and he's being influenced by them. That's
yeah,
everyday leadership, and those
mm,
are the types of things that I want to encourage more people to do. And I'm actually at a place where I would love to get. If you guys look me up on LinkedIn, but send me your stories of everyday leaders and how they've influenced you, because I think there's a million stories out there that need to be
mm,
told. And I
mm,
would love to be able to collect some of these things and actually someday,
mm,
one day, tell some of these stories because they're out there. And it's not people, it's your dad, it's your teacher, it's your
mm,
professor, it's a friend down the road. Those are the kinds of
mm.
people that's going to make a difference.
That's profound. Like even my wife, for instance, right? Like there's a lot of like to your point, like she holds me more accountable than all of the celebrities that I know, like combined, right? But
Yeah.
you know, but if someone's asking me if you could choose one person, you know, the question like if you could meet someone dead or alive, like who would that one person be? Like I would probably say like Anthony Bourdain or you know what I mean, someone that's like
Yeah.
more prominent, right? Like, but I'm sorry to say this, honey, but I'm probably not gonna choose you if it's like, you know what I mean? If someone is asked, but but that makes you think like it's like, oh, well, why like why isn't that the case, right? It's like maybe
Yeah.
I'm not present to the accountability. Maybe the accountability lands as nagging or like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's a little bit harder to choose if it's like out of everyone in the world, like, ooh, like that's a tough one.
But here's the great thing with that accountability. So Tony is my uncle Tony. He's the one that gave me a hard time for about not painting the right way, and he gave me a hard time.
Yeah.
And he was laughing with me. He was ribbing me. It wasn't like coming across like this, but it creates a culture of like, hey, Derek, you just don't know what you're doing. I mean, and we're laughing about it. We're all having a good old time. Yeah, don't get Derek to paint your thing, but hey, let me show you how to do it right. But that teaches us culture and how to interact with people without coming down. I will tell you, people who have everyday leaders, we do have to do less in the real corporate world to train them to be leaders because they
Mm,
are learning those skills every single day, but they're learning them in different contexts. It's just like with Michael Jordan, his father. He learned a lot of things before he got on the court. And now all he had to do is
mm,
apply the knowledge of his basketball skills on the court of what his dad has taught him all
mm,
his life. And
mm,
that is what's going to make everyday culture. And it
mm,
scares me because we have less of that going on. And I always say hate to look at things and say, look how bad this culture is today, because we had them in my era as well. But we are stuck on our phones, and we are stuck on
yeah.
gaming, and we're stuck on those kinds
Mm,
of things. In previous generations, and I would say my father's generations, they had the Elk Club, they had the Rotary Club, they
mm,
had those kinds of things where they were always doing things together. and developing those leadership skills. They had churches. Those aren't the things people are going to today, but they learned those skills there. And so I've listed out, I've talked about people and say, you know, everyday leaders lead individuals. They propel individuals to greater themselves, and they provide a community of people that is engaging and healthy. They serve individuals' goals and ambitions, and they're interested more than work stuff. They're interested in the entirety of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Organizational leaders, they're interested in the strategy and the organization of successful projects. And none of that's bad. They should be. They should be making money so that they are providing services to the community. But they're not interested in all those other things. Everyday leaders are actually the ones who will develop the full person, not just the parts that get us the money and complete the project. And that is key on the everyday leaders.
That's profound, right? I mean, we were both obviously very invested in our corporate career, so you know, it's where we both get it. It's interesting, right? Because I mean, I have this conversation with my clients a lot. They're like, well, why should I hire you? Like, why won't I just have a mentor at my organization? And I'm like, well, yeah, your mentor wants you to get promoted within the organization, right? But the moment you leave that organization, like I hate to say you're dead to them, but like they're no longer invested in your success, usually, like most of the time, right?
Yep.
And so they have a vested interest in you getting promoted because that makes them look good. Not to say like mentorship's not important. Like it's definitely one of the main pillars that I recommend, but there's a difference between having an objective coach who has no, like, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter where you go, right? Like I have no vested interest in that. I just want what's best for you versus, you know, I have five mentors at my organization, all at different directors and above and senior VPs, et cetera. But you know, they want me to succeed within the context of the value I provide to TriNet or LinkedIn or whatever organization I'm a part of. Yeah.
And you're exactly right. But your everyday leaders are investing in. So when I wanted to get into L&D years ago, there's a guy. His name's Mike, and I met him outside of the organization. Actually, I joined. He's a part of Toastmasters, and I got to be friends with Toastmasters. I got to be friends with him through Toastmasters, and he just kind of started mentoring me. And he'd be calling me up during the week, and he'd encourage me to do different things. And I wasn't in the field that I'm in now. I wanted to get into it. I wanted to break into it. And I'll tell you, he worked on so many skills of mine and helped me through this. And he was a couple years from retirement, and I'm like young kid. I mean, and he is just mentoring me and helping me. Now, he didn't mentor me in everything because he didn't know everything, but he helped me develop as a professional, as a leader in many ways that an organization couldn't have done. And then when my chance came, I was ready to hit that home run. And the chance came in with one of the organizations, and I was able to go there. That's what Mike did. That's what Mike did for me. And he's that everyday leader. He's a hero. I tell people, I said, in any situation you are, there's a leader. And I find that some great corporate leaders sometimes aren't great everyday leaders. And I find some great everyday leaders are not great corporate leaders. But I will say great everyday leaders prepare you to be better corporate leaders.
Yeah, that's profound. And I do, because there's certain differences, right? Like it almost sometimes these corporate leaders, I hate to generalize, but sometimes because they're so laser focused on the corporate stuff, sometimes their personal life is sometimes even non-existent or just suffering, right? Because of just the lack of attention or prioritization. It's like, hey, like I'm gonna choose working 80 hours versus like being there for my kid. I can't generalize, like, but oftentimes, like the higher up you go, right? It's like, hey, there was a sacrifice, there was a cost to them to get to that, and that's insightful what you're sharing.
And we all know those leaders, and we know those CEOs who are phenomenal CEOs. But I would never want to be that close of a friend with them. And I would not want to open up a beer and have a beer with them, because they're just not that great people to be around. And they're I will tell you, the CEOs I look at have the whole package. I worked for one CEO, and he did the same thing. He still went to his hometown every week. He lived in the New York area. He went to his hometown every week to still have breakfast with his old childhood buddies. and they were still influencing him. And I'm not going to mention his name, but he is very well known internationally, and he would still do that every single week. Now, that's saying something, and that's the kind of people we want to have, and that everyday leaders there.
Yeah, so it's interesting because when we chase the next like promotion, and then the higher up you go, there's a lot of these influencers that are, famous business icons that always say, "Hey, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with," and so it makes you think: Are they saying that, oh, I shouldn't spend more time with my mom, my dad, my wife, my kids? Like, does that mean I should hang out with other CEOs? So it's like, but it's almost like a cliche now, right? It's like, oh, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's like, so if you're the CEO of if you're Jack Welch, does that mean you shouldn't spend time with your relatives, your cousins? Like, so that's always interesting.
But let me change that phrase just a little bit, because that's a great phrase, but let's change it in the sense of, we should be looking at the leadership qualities of the people that we're around, and what is it about them, what are their strengths that we should be focusing on. I'm a big fan of Strength Finders and Clifton Strengths, and I'm a big fan of looking at that. So when I look at my dad, I don't look at my dad will never be able to get up and do a presentation. I do that for a living, all right? But he will never be able to get up in front of 100 people, 1,000 people, 10 people and give a presentation. But where is my dad is strong? And when we look at everyday leaders, what we should be doing as leaders is saying, what strengths are they bringing here? And how can I learn from those strengths to strengthen myself? And so with my dad, and I'll say the same thing with Michael Jordan's dad. Michael Jordan's dad is not the best basketball player ever in the world, but he has influenced his son. My dad is not the best presenter in the world, but he has influenced me. And so I think we should be looking at that. But everyday leaders, if we want to be everyday leaders, what we do is we go in every situation and saying, how can I be a leader here to positively impact it? Whether it's a family reunion, whether it is going out to get ice cream with kids, whether it is meeting someone on the street. You are a leader in everyday life. And a lot of times as leaders, when we go out the front doors or we turn off the Zoom, we'll go out the front doors of the corporate office and turn off the Zoom, we stop being leaders. Everyday leaders is looking, how can I be a leader there? And what can I do there to have that happen? Those are the people going to impact it. And I will say this, it goes throughout all age ranges. I've got nieces and nephews around here. I've got a grandbaby now. And I oftentimes see people ignore the kids, but the everyday leaders look at this as, how can I influence even the kids that are running around here and talking, and how can I influence all generations and be that leader and maybe that mentor? And maybe I'm not a mentor on how to shoot a basketball, but I could be a mentor on how to engage people or keep accountability or loving, even when you're not very lovable at times. I mean, those are the types of things that we need to be looking at and bringing to the plate there.
Well, I think this is my hypothesis. Let me know if you find this to be accurate. But it's often sometimes the folks that are at the highest level, right? There's a bit of politicking that goes around, right? And that means visibility, or hey, I'm the lead on this, but this is my idea. Like I was the person, right? Like sometimes the more ego driven, right? But to your point, a lot of everyday leaders, they don't care who gets the credit. They're just there to serve. And sometimes the ones that are super quiet, that don't, they're the ones that, hey, like that was all you. I had nothing to do with it. And that's your everyday leader, right? Those are the folks that, yes, they might not have the biggest titles or they might not make the most money, but they're just genuinely there and they're just happy. They're like, hey, like congratulations on your promotion, and they won't even take credit for it. But you know that they had a huge part in it, but they're just very humble.
I have a cousin who is he's a chief experience officer, I believe, for a major organization. And his mom, I was talking to his mom last night, and she was telling me, she says, I keep a thing for all of my kids of all their successes. And he's right now out of the country going through this big merger, and she sending this chief experience officer emails. Your mom wants you to send some things of what you're doing so she can keep this record of who you are. She's interested in his success. And this
Oh,
is a great thing that she's doing. And I was like, do you embarrass him when he do that? She goes, he just sends me the stuff he wants. And it's a pretty big merger. It's made pretty big headlines, and he's
yeah.
doing a great job with this. But
Huh.
again, you're right. Everyday leaders are really not interested in taking credit. They want success for you, and
Mm,
they in their proverbial refrigerator, they're putting your picture up
mm,
there with all your accomplishments, and they're proud of what you've succeeded in. They're not
mm,
looking for the pat on the back. And you're right. A lot of times in corporate, it is about, hey, look what I did, or look how I did this. And you know as well as I do, that gets you only so much. But everyday leaders are applauding you. Everyday leaders are helping you,
mm.
and they're seeing how they can influence you. And like my aunt, it's like, I just want to hear all the successes that you do.
Oh, it and it's interesting, right? Because like you said, every leader there has to be folks, right? You can't lead with just one person, right? So
Mm,
a lot of times those people that are always singing your praises, they're just like, "Oh my God, Derek, you're so amazing!" Like, wow, like that's so cool. It's
mm.
it's like we forget that those people they're doing that for a reason, right? Because they're trying to build you up or they're trying to
Yeah.
validate or give you that confidence. And it's interesting. This is a good topic because to your point, there's just everyone else gets there's folks that are often talked about, but like to your point, like your mom and dad have way more of an influence than someone that, a lot
Yeah.
of times died 300 years ago, but people are still talking about them.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and it doesn't have to be mom and dad, because I know a lot of times we have broken families right now, and a lot of people don't have a mom or a dad, or either. My mom was an
Mm,
orphan. She grew up in an orphanage, and I wrote an article on her, my LinkedIn page, about, she's from Puerto Rico. They immigrated. Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but they still call it immigration. They immigrated
yeah.
here. She was put in an orphanage, so she didn't have a mom or dad, and who took care of, who led her. But I wrote an article on her everyday leadership skills that she brought, that I was influenced by. And so sometimes you can buffer that by having other people come alongside of you. And I tell people, this is a couple things you could do really easily to make sure you're influenced by people. First of all, get together with people on a regular basis that will make fun of you, laugh at you, but encourage you at the same time. And I've got a couple of those groups. One of them I meet with every Monday morning. I meet with a group of guys, and I will tell you what, if they're not harassing me about something, then something's wrong. But they're all successful business people. They are all successful, but a couple of them retired, but they're all successful business people, and we really do encourage one another and get there. I think doing that, you find ways to invest in other people. There's, look to people that you can invest in and say, I'm going to put a lot of time and energy on them, but try not to be everything to them. One of the things I think mistakes mentors make is they say, oh, I'm the end all of everything.
Hmm,
And what I tell people when I'm working with them, I was like, this is where I'm specialize in. This is
hmm,
what I'm good at. Find someone for these other areas that I can't do that.
mm,
And I try to get them to focus in on that, but find those other people, but then also stay connected with people. I was a professor for a while. For 12 years, I was a professor. And one of the studies that we looked at is that people who networked well were more likely to get promoted than those who did not. It wasn't about job
mm,
knowledge. It wasn't about job skills. It was all about networking. And the statistics are amazing out there. Your job should be out there is being that everyday leader, bringing people into the fold. And what you're going to do by doing that and teaching them how to engage people and teaching them community, you're going to help them get promoted quicker and faster and further,
mm,
because they will be learning skills from you that you don't even mean to teach, because it's just part of your everyday life.
hmm. It and what are your thoughts on because you're right, I've also come from like and my dad wasn't around most of my life and
Mm,
a lot of Vietnam my parents were refugees from the Vietnam War, so
mm,
being exposed to a lot of that. Most of my Vietnamese friends also have never had a dad or
mm,
so but I think sometimes those that could also be like a very big lesson, right? Because in what we experience and what we don't want can also be a huge driver in wanting to learn and wanting to grow, and so I think sometimes not having that, it can also be a powerful teacher as well.
There's more to overcome. There's definitely more to overcome it if you don't have that. But I agree with you. What we would do if you don't have that, what I would encourage you to do is try to find ways to get that. And so there was a time because of family situations that my mom reached out to another person in our community to help with her and me. And I guess I was that bad of a kid that she needed help. And there was some challenges that we had that they had. And that person
Mm,
really did help me from the time I was seventh grade to the ninth grade. Some of those
mm,
formative years where, everything that could go wrong is going wrong with it in a guy's life. And Brett was a tremendous influence. And after that,
mm,
I networked with somebody at church named Denny, and he took me through college. And these people helped, but you can find that, but but it can't be done. I don't think it can be done well on Zoom. I don't think it can be
mm.
done well on the phone all the time. You have to have physical contact. You have to spend time together. Go out and
Yeah.
kayak. Go out and hike a
Mm.
mountain. Go out and do putt putt. I don't care what it is, but have those interactions and engagements.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like it's the resourcefulness to find it in other channels, right? Like you said, it could be at church, it could be volunteering, it could be whatever it is, right? It could be
Mhm.
your neighbor, maybe your neighborhood store owner who just
Yeah.
it's just invested in you and just like, hey, what are you up to? Like just even like the small little interactions. I remember like I got into Rutgers, which in New Jersey that's like a pretty common thing, right? But I remember
Yeah.
going to the doctor's office, and the what do you call the front desk person was like, "Wow, you got into Rutgers?" Like, "Oh my god!" Like she made it seem like I was going to Harvard, right?
Yeah.
But it was to your point. It's like, oh wow, like that's nice. Like it's like someone sees me and it's like realizes like for me like that's an accomplishment, right? But it's like that's like to your point, that's like an everyday leader. It's like just like a very enthusiastic, like a very simple, couple minute interaction. But it made me feel like wow, like that I feel proud that I got into Rutgers.
You should feel proud of getting into Rutgers, but that's an everyday leader who encourages you and develops you. That's a perfect thing that you have. And can you imagine Michael Jordan's father when he went first to UNC and then later to Chicago, and could you imagine the influences Rosa Parks has had in her life to do what she did?
Mm,
Could you imagine the leadership who influenced Martin Luther King? Who could you imagine those people? Those are the people I want to know more about. I want to know more
mm,
about who
mm,
influenced Martin Luther King, that he would be able to go up and say that I have a dream speech, and he could give that speech. Not who taught him oratory, but who taught him life,
mm,
and that he could walk and be willing to be arrested for something that he believed in and
mm,
changed entire society since then. I want
mm,
to know who influenced him. Those are the people I think are everyday leaders. And we have those people that we will never know. We will
mm.
never know their names. Again, those are the people that are most important.
Yeah, what like it sounds like your father and Denny, so there's a lot of influences that caused you to be more curious about asking about other people's everyday leaders.
Mhm.
Would you say there were a couple profound moments, or was it just a series of a lot of different that
So that's a great question. With my dad, so there's been so many profound moments, but recently he and my stepmother were married for 40 years. So there was and she died. My dad has had such a profound impact on this entire community that I will tell you, my stepbrother walks into the cinemas, and they come out and give him a hug, and they say, here's a free ticket to see a movie. We go into a restaurant, and the restaurant people come from behind the counter, and they give us all hugs, and they say,
Mm,
hey, the food's on us today. We're having today, Kroger is delivering for us free food because of the impact my dad and our family has had.
mm,
And that's kind of what started that found moment saying,
Mm,
So my dad will wake up, and my dad, he will mow. He mows. He's retired. He's 80 years old. He mows like 7, 8 lawns in this community. Many of them don't
mm,
even pay him for it. There was a lady up the street for years. She lived up the street from him. She was older, much older than he was, and she did. When something went wrong in her house, who did she call? She called my dad. He didn't
mm,
call anybody else, and he'd go and he'd fix a plumbing problem or
mm,
whatever, never charge her. And I was start seeing this, that my dad was big about community, big about investing in people, big about all this stuff that people,
mm,
that lady, her own son says, I think my mom loves your dad more than she loves me. And there's a lot of truth to that, because he had such an influence on everybody. One time there's a couple moved in, they had a new baby, and they couldn't afford much. And my dad's over there working on their house, mowing their lawn, not charging them for anything. And
mm,
I see this outpouring of people who absolutely have come to us, and we're come to us and say, you have influenced us, and you have impacted us. And the whole
mm,
community has kind of come around this. And I'm like, my dad gets bored with conversations after 10 minutes, but everyone knows he cares for them. He'll do anything for them. And there's another profound moment. I'll mention this, is my sister got a new house, and she needed some work done in the crawl space. My brother and I are both professionals. You don't want to paint things in our hands. He's pretty successful in his business and all the things he's done. And my dad goes to my brother and says, hey, I need you to do this under the crawl space. It will take you all day on Saturday. And my brother said, Dad, I really don't want to do this. And my dad looked at him and he said, it just like a leader would. He says, well, we'll remember that next time you need help. That Saturday, my brother was underneath the crawl space doing everything there. And
oh,
that is the kind of leader my dad is. You don't say no to my
mm,
dad often, but that's the kind of leader my dad is. My dad is a
mm,
phenomenal leader that the whole community has been turned on to him. That's the kind of leaders I want to see, who are influencing generations, not just his own generation, people older than him, people younger than him. So those are what
mm,
was profound. And I started thinking about that. I said, I think my dad has had more influence every day than I love Ken Blanchard, than Ken Blanchard
mm,
has.
mm,
Uh, Ken Blanchard may have had organizational, but my dad's influencing people in real life every single day. And as much as I love Ken Blanchard, he will never come and crawl underneath my crawl space.
mm.
My dad will.
I have a theory about what you just said. I do think the more public figures, right? I hate to say it's more transactional, but in order to
Mm,
kind of get to that level of fame
mm,
where you're, typically you're traveling a lot more, you're not really home, you're kind of like, burning the midnight oil, you're doing red
mm,
eyes, like, so, at home they probably it I've read enough billionaire biographies to see that, like, everyone knows,
yeah.
like, billionaires have high divorce percentages, right? There's probably a reason, like, yes, like they've invested so much energy and they impact people in terms of they help other people make more money, organizations more money, the bottom line, stock shareholders, etc. But to your point, like the folks that I know that like love their parents, like my wife, for instance, like she loves her mom and dad. And
Mhm,
to your point, like, they go to church, they're good people, but they're not, doing like podcast episodes every day and have
mm,
millions of subscribers, right? They're just, but to in the eyes of the three, my wife and her two siblings, they're like heroes, like they're just like perfect
yeah.
parents, right? But to your point, no one really talks about that. And in some cases, like a lot of us, we take our parents for granted, right? It's like, well, they're supposed to like sacrifice everything for us. Like that's what parents do. But it's like really being present and acknowledging that versus taking it for granted.
Yeah, and I think it's acknowledging that, and I also think of saying, I don't think every parent is perfect. I don't think any parent is perfect. My dad's not perfect.
Yeah.
My mom's not perfect. Denny, who influenced me tremendously, was perfect. Mike Harbor, I talked about, he's not perfect. No, I'm not perfect. Nobody is perfect out there. And so we have to
Mm,
understand, that's why let's start with where they're strong. Let's start with their weakness. What can I learn from this person at this time? And and write those things down. And I think what we will find out is that people like my dad, or people like Mike, or people like my mom, There are things, even though they're not perfect, we can learn a tremendous amount. And then what we can do is, what I want us to do is transform that into we being everyday leaders, not just organizational leaders. There's nothing wrong with organizational leaders, but when we do that, the downhill effect is when we are being everyday leaders and there are people who are investing in everyday leaders, the training programs that
Mm,
I do in most organizations become less important because we're getting it the 20%, the mentoring, and we're doing it every single
mm,
day, that it's not going to have as big of the training programs that we have in organizations
mm,
are just refining now. They're not major. I've got to go in situations where you have this person and they are just horrible leaders. I mean, they're just absolutely a mess. And my job is to try to coach, and you've done this, you've tried to coach and try to get them the right training and everything else like that to try to improve them. And oftentimes I look at them and says, who's influenced you? And let's talk about that. And when you start
mm,
doing that, sometimes some of these people is like, oh, I don't have any friends. And
mm,
I've come across that many times. And my first thing is,
mm,
you need to get around a community of people who can influence you.
mm.
And when you're around that, it will help you tremendously.
Yeah, it's almost like the adage. I think a lot of people say like it's lonely at the top. It's like,
Mhm,
well, yeah, at that with that mindset, of course you're gonna feel alone, right? But if you
mhm,
really sit down and you think there's no such thing as a self-made man or self-made
mhm,
entrepreneur, it's like every single person has had an influence in you, whether you like to acknowledge it or not, right? So it's
mhm.
being present to that. So you do clearly, you've been in corporate for a while and you've seen a lot. What do you think is missing in corporate right now that doesn't that is just so focused on like the productivity and the bottom line, and where do you
Yeah.
think we could add a little bit more of these types of curriculums into programs?
Yeah. So I don't know if you could add this to a I don't think this is something you program. It's kind of, I can't program being a father, right? I could give you some principles to do this. And this is one of the reasons why I think what I would really encourage people to do is saying, okay, how can you get outside of your comfort zone? And this is where I would encourage people to find something outside to engage you. So used to be, we had those big organizations, and I would say organizations like the Rotary and the Kiwanis Club and those kinds of things. And they've gone off to the side a little bit. And I know a lot of people, they're not what they used to be, but we still have volunteer organizations. We have the United Way.
Mm-hmm.
We have St. Jude's. We have uh, um, things where you can go to where I used to live near the beach, and you go to the beach and help clean up the beach and do those kinds of things. But something that gets you with people and meeting people, even going to meetup, there's that app that you can have, and you can look, and there's a lot of professional sites, but there's a lot of non-professional things. I actually go several times to this ecology club where we go and we hike in the woods, and we enjoy nature and talk about nature. And that interaction with one another has really form a great community. But I think those are the things that we need to encourage. What I want us to do is, because when I'm in a corporate setting, I'm looking at how to make you successful in the corporate environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my job. And that's what you want. But I oftentimes think it's not just about this one slice of you, it's the whole person. We have to think about the whole person, not just the slice. And so sometimes I will recommend these other things. And I usually ask a question like, what do you enjoy? What are some of the things that you would like to take up? Do you like to hike? Maybe there's a hiking or a running club or something like that, where you can start getting involved in these things and forming deep relationships. And that's the key. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just superficial, these deep relationships that will take you for a long time.
I think what you're saying is it's pretty prevalent in a lot of the Asian American community, where a lot of having met a lot of these like high performing like folks that get into Ivy Leagues, like sometimes the parents train them so much to be, I did say one dimensional, but it's like all about the grades, perfect grades, like, or just stacking the resume so that you get into Ivy League school. But then if you ask them like, well, what do you do outside of that? It's like, they're like, what do you mean? Like, I
Yeah,
go to tutoring, I go to Kumon, and like, well, like, what about the weekends? It's like, do you realize how hard it is to get into Harvard? Or it's like,
yeah,
well, like my parents forced me to take this lessons like violin so that I could also have some extracurriculars, right? It's like, well, what do you do for fun? It's like, what do you mean?
Nothing.
Like, is there
Yeah.
like, it's like, and it's like, wait, and there's a whole generation of kids, like, especially like the younger Asian American community where they literally like don't have any social skills. Like it's so interesting. I'm like, yeah, and you see it and you're like, man, like that's so crazy. But it's like that's the world that we live in now. It's just uber competitive and their parents are always comparing. It's like, well, Johnny, got a perfect score in his SATs. Like what, it's just like it's just who's gonna break the cycle.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with academic achievement, but you're exactly right. You can have the greatest academic or greatest professional achievement, but lose everything else in your life. And what is life? Is life about becoming the CEO and becoming a millionaire by 40? I mean, is that life, or is life much more than that? Is developing yourself much more than what you can do is lead projects, lead strategy, and accomplish the goals? If that's all of course, organizations, that's it, but we're much more than that. And I think, again, I said at the beginning, if we had greater everyday leaders, they will make greater organizational leaders. But organizational leaders some of them will never be great everyday leaders. I really truly believe that. The guy who founded servant leadership in the 1970s, he never rose to the top of AT&T or Mall
Mm.
Bell where he was at. But no one doubts. No one doubts he influenced a lot of leaders, right? So sometimes you don't get the CEO title, but we're trying to develop the entirety of the person.
Yeah, I mean, even my background has been mostly in tech sales, right? So
Mhm.
this is a common, as an L&D leader, this is probably one of the most common use cases. But the person that ends up getting promoted are often the ones that are really excel at that individual contributing role, right?
Mhm.
But that usually means like they were so laser focused, like they weren't the ones that are like trying to help onboard the new people. They're not the ones that are answering questions when someone's slacking or teaming, like, hey, can someone help me with this? They're the ones that perform because they were laser focused, they tuned out the noise, they probably didn't even attend some of the company wide meetings because they're like, no, like my job is to sell as much, make as
Mhm.
much money as possible. And they're the ones that end up getting promoted. So then you get whereas like sometimes the people that are the first to like, hey, I'll welcome the new guy, I'll show them the ropes, I'll introduce them to everyone. But then they're doing that every day, and then they're sometimes middle of the pack performing, right? So they don't
Mhm.
get promoted as often. So it's I think that's some of it as well. It's like just because you really excelled at that IC and you were hyper focused and you were specialized and you were really good at that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best person like on paper to become a manager.
And that's actually what I look for in more leaders that I do. I don't look for people who are always technically proficient. I could teach technical skills. I don't necessarily. I teach people who know people, and more of the everyday leader. And I think you see you're referring to the technical gets promoted to the technical. That came from Dr. Katz back in the 1970s. That was his research there, and he obviously strategy and interpersonal skills become more important as we go up. And the Dr. Katz study kind of showed that the technical proficiency got us the promotion,
Mm.
but then as soon as you get promoted, it becomes strategies more important, and then the interpersonal skills become much more important than that. And so I think that also says we need to be continually revising what we're looking for in those next levels, and obviously work with your HR department on developing good strategies for succession planning, not just the person who does a great job, but really what you're looking for, whether it's 9 box or another method that you use. But you're right, we need to have that. And I think those last two skills, strategy and the interpersonal skills or the human skills, those two things you learn most in everyday leaders. Michael Jordan did not learn his technical skills was amazing, but he didn't learn that from his big mentor. He learned those other two skills from his mentor, his dad. The technical skills he learned from coaches. We can get coaches to teach you that. I could teach you technical skills and you could flourish on that, but I can't teach you it's harder to teach those other ones. And if you
Mm.
have a lifetime of learning and growing in that, do that. One of the things we had with my kids, I put them through is we put them through something called Civil Air Patrol. It teaches leadership. It teaches a lot of other things. It's a great organization. It's nationwide, and it's part of the United States Air Force, which is pretty cool. And that is one of the things that we really wanted to focus them on. We didn't care about the technical of how to fly a plane, which they did learn some. We wanted them to learn how to be leaders. And that was another way of doing it, of everyday leaders and walking around with people who are very successful and can infuse that to others.
Hmm. So you mentioned there's a decline in like Rotary Club and all these like the
Mm,
Key Club and all these
mm,
other things. Do you feel like, is it because in this world of technology and efficiency, like
mm.
we're just optimizing for like productivity and less on like actual human to human?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think we are. I don't know. I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, or what, where this has happened. But I think the studies have shown since the 1980s, there's been a decline in interaction of people personally interacting and having good friends. And
Mm,
the study just released new studies out to this last month and a month and a half, and it shows we're at the lowest point in recorded history of Americans having close personal interaction with
mm,
friends. I don't know what's
mm,
causing that. I think it predates the cell phone. It predates the internet.
mm.
So this decline goes back a lot further than that. But I do
Okay.
think those are contributing to it. So I don't know why that is the case. But what I think has happened now is we are so focused and I'm a type A personality. This is the goal. Let's accomplish it. This is the goal. Let's accomplish it. But I think we need to be stepping back and saying, okay, how can we develop the whole person, not just for this one project, not just for
Mm,
this one thing, and kind of focusing in on that. But why is this? I would love to see someone write a dissertation on that. That should be a
mm.
good dissertation. I would read it and everything else like that, and things like that. I see somebody actually put something in the chat, and she's a former employee of mine, she's a direct report of mine. Hey,
Nice.
Ashley, it's good to see you. And in fact, she's a person. I'll highlight
Oh,
her. She's done a lot of things on the side that helped to make her a great leader. And when I hired her, it wasn't because she was qualified for the position I had, but it's all the other things that she tried to do to get her in that position. And I said, a person who will do that is going to do a great job in that position. And that's why I hired her. I hired her actually twice.
oh
So
wow.
anyway, Ashley, you spoke up, so I got to comment on that. So you said, look at the key. What are the key human skills that you look for in someone who's promoting them for the next leadership role? And she may already know this. I mean, I use the famous hungry, humble, and smart. And
Mm,
I didn't create that. Just hungry for the position. They really want that. They are humble. They are very humble about what they do, and they're smart. I think they can do the job, and even if they don't know everything, there's not been a position I've hired somebody on that they could walk in and do it immediately. Whether it's a
mm,
cultural issues, whether it's something else, they have to be smart enough to do that. And when I look at smart, I'm looking at not just you're smart on the technical issues, you're human skills smart as well. You know how
mm.
to interact on that. And Ashley, you probably have heard that one before, and because I know she's heard that one before actually. So.
Ye- Yeah, I also in addition to that, I like people who are or leaders who are resourceful, right? Like they're able
Mhm.
to like be creative, but ultimately like the ones that can see others greatness when everyone else is counting them out, right? It's like they could see like that ounce of potential. Oh, Ashley said yes. um that ounce of potential in someone that no one has ever seen, right? Like I had one leader, Mike Ragone, who for whatever reason it always bugged me that he would always say this, but it'll never leave my side. He's like, Davidson, if I had an ounce of your talent, I wouldn't put it to waste. I just wouldn't waste it. And I think what he was trying to say is like, hey, like it's great that you're spontaneous and you can wing it, but he's just like, imagine if you actually prepared, like and not just winged everything. It's like, dude, you'd be so much more successful. He would always say that. I was like, oh, like stop saying that. It's like because then I actually have to mount out to something, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So there's a we have. I think interaction community is going to really help foster that. I don't know how to turn this tide. at Davidson. I don't know how to do that, and talent's only going to get you so far. America isn't the number one. I actually do believe this. I don't know if there's a statistics showing this. I think the United States of America has become the worldwide leader in business because of our culture and our farm culture, our culture that hard work, of diligence, and because we fostered a great culture within the United States to help propel us there. I could be wrong. Someone may have done the research and actually do that, but I actually think that's the case. But I think we will lose it because we are not developing everyday leaders, and we're technically proficient. I actually believe there are cultures that are more technically proficient than we are. But I think that what they're missing is so many other skills that we have developed. I want to encourage us to go back to those everyday leadership principles that we have there.
Huh. My theory on this is because of the diversity in America. Like, I
Yeah.
haven't been to any other countries that is as diverse as a nation, and because of all the different waves of immigrants at various stages, it seems like everyone just exports their best and their brightest, or their most entrepreneurial folks. So I think it's a mixture of entrepreneurialism, and then the other half is like the diversity component, and the
Yeah.
melting pot that is the United States.
And that there's a lot of truth to that, because when you go back 100 years, and when people are coming over here, and they're still coming over here because they're hungry, they want opportunity, they see what's great in this country, and they want a part of that. Who doesn't? I mean, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm here and here. But when you look at that, there is the sense that we do change each other by being around people who are different than us. I would actually encourage hiring managers: don't hire the person who's like you. Hire the person who's not like you. Hire the person who disagrees with you and looks at you and say, "Hey, Derick, you're wrong, and I disagree with you on this."
Hmm.
Hire that person who's going to be that, and I think the diversity has something to do with that. Um, and and you're right. I think it helps us.
Hmm. So
And
yeah,
that's a good point. I'll add that to that: the diversity melting pot.
but I do think that, to your point, there's something about, because there's a lot of America that still farms, and even today, right? So we and all, like, New York City, LA, Chicago, we get all the,
Mm,
DC, we get all of the limelight, but we forget that the backbone of America is still, there's still a lot of people that are in the factories, like,
mm,
there's a lot of folks that are a lot of farmers. So it's like we tend to, I mean, to your point, there are everyday leaders. Like, they're not the ones that are
yeah.
on the big screen like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates with the, but we can't exist. We, like, America would not be able to run without all these truck drivers and all
Mm.
these other leaders that are, they don't need as much validation as yeah.
I think we would all do a service if we spent a couple of weeks on a farm with a farmer who works and gets up every day. I think we would learn so much more leadership lessons.
Huh.
I put on a conference, Ashley, who's here. She actually knows what it is. She actually knows this conference. I put on a conference for an organization for several years. And one year we did a question and answer, and this kid, he was young, and he came up and really showed himself. It was really a bad situation. He worked for the organization, and it was embarrassing to watch him, and it was embarrassing for him. But there's this guy. He's nobody you would ever know. He's not a leader in the
Huh.
organization, and he sat down with this kid, and he says, and you're talking years, decades difference between their ages, and he actually had a good father son type of conversation with him, and saying, "Hey, let me teach you some things here," and just a really good everyday leader conversation that kid will never forget as long as he lived. And the impact it had on everybody else who knew about that conversation, I still talk about it today because it impacted me.
Hmm.
That guy did the right thing, and it wasn't like beating him across the head and saying, "Look how bad you are." It's, "I care for you. I don't get anything because you don't report to me. You're
Hmm.
totally a different part of the organization. I just care for you, and I want you to grow."
Hmm.
That is a great everyday leader there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's profound. And it I'm not sure if it's because cell phones are more prevalent or social media or
Mhm.
whatever it is, right? But I think there is something to be said about, just stop following like the Kardashians, stop following like it's great like once in a while, yes, it's fine, but
Yeah.
right, it's like the more because I'm not gonna lie, even growing up, right, I would watch all these like and read all these business books, and I was just like, oh man, like my parents aren't out there saving the world and donating $1 million, like billions of dollars to malaria, can't fighting. So then it almost makes us like not acknowledge our parents because and my mom does nails for a living, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many ways I can honor her, but there's society is just so especially in the business world is so like focused on Jack Welch and all these leaders that everyone talks about all day, especially in L&D, and it's like it would probably help us if we had workshops that's like more focused around just celebrating like our neighbors, like literally the
Yeah.
guy who like
Eh,
grabs my mail every once in a while, but he's just always has a smile on, is always like excited to see me.
and I'll add to that. You say your mom did nails. My mom, when she retired, she was working on the grounds of a college. She literally mowed
Mm,
lawns,
mm,
and she went from Puerto Rico to an orphanage into mowing lawns. But you know what? There's a former presidential candidate. I don't want to get in politics, but there's a former presidential candidate named Ben Carson. And Ben Carson was raised in poverty by his mom. His mom couldn't read; she was illiterate, and she would ask him to write reports on these books that he read and submit them to her. And she would
mm,
read. She would act like she read them, but she couldn't read. She was illiterate. But he talks about her as being the most profound of her leaders, of his
mm.
leaders, and he became a world famous brain surgeon. I mean, he was, and his mom can't even read, and my mom never made more than $28,000 a year.
Mm.
And she, I mean, she was, and when she died. That's all she made. I mean, she was didn't wasn't, but she had successful leadership traits that influenced me and my brother and my sister. That's what she was.
Mm.
And I think everyday leaders is not how much money you make or the title that you have, it's the influence you exude.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, Derek. How can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
So the best way to get in touch with me, go to LinkedIn. I'm at Derick Dickens, and so find me on LinkedIn. And if you stay connect, I'm an open networker, so come on. I welcome anybody there. And every so often, I produce articles about what's going on with everyday leaders. Also, I just encourage people, send me your everyday leader stories. I'm collecting these. I would love to read these as I speak to different organizations. I would love to know how in the world can you how are you being influenced by everyday leaders that we can learn. Grant, I love Simon Sinek. I love these great leaders that you've talked about, but I think we actually get more. I think we've been led more by these everyday leaders than.
Thank you so much, Derek. This has been super insightful. I love the passion, the enthusiasm, the amazing work that you're doing. I'm a fan for life, so I'm always here to support you. And thank you so much for sharing. Oh, Ashley said thanks, Derek. Thanks,
Thank
Ashley.
you. And thank you, Davidson. I really appreciated the conversation.